And the iPad's up in the hand. Good morning, folk. Are you on the big screen? Let's see who we've got on board this morning. Morning, Sandra, Lorna, Robert, Linda, Derek, Paul, Lillian, Lorraine, Robert again, Kirsty. Morning, Mr. Mulligan. Morning, Mr. Henry. Morning, Stephen. Morning, Brian. Morning, Raymond. Lenny, Alison, where are we, 81, nearly there. Morning, Nancy. Morning, Wilma. Morning, Tina. Morning, Tommy. Morning, Bruce. Morning, Tricia. Madam Director, if you don't mind, please, you know how nervous I get before I go on and you've got me playing in the background. The director's at home today, folks, along with me. Anyway, that's 100 of yous on board, so let's get this broadcast underway. Indytruck, Davy out the truck and in his office at home in Salisbury, where it is clearing up nicely, 13 degrees. So that's the weather forecast for Salisbury, North Lanarkshire. You want to know what the weather's like where you are? Look at the bloody windy. Alright, so we'll get this broadcast underway and we'll start with the latest COVID stats. 3,978 new cases were detected on Wednesday. 1,819 people were in hospital, 20 of which were in the intensive care units. Unfortunately, 45 deaths were registered from Tuesday to Wednesday, where coronavirus was a contributing factor in the deaths. Now, according to the National Records of Scotland, 21.7 people died of coronavirus per day up to weekend on the 17th of the 4th, 2022. The Office for National Statistics estimate that 1 in 17 Scottish citizens have currently got the virus, or 6% of the population. So COVID's still rife out there, folks, in the community. Okay. Now, since, this is quite interesting, since the coronavirus or COVID-19 hit our shores, 32.78% of the population have tested positive for COVID, and 0.26% of the population have died with COVID as a contributing factor in their death. 72.5% of the population have now had 3 shots of the vaccine. So that's a wee bit more than what we've been doing lately, but that's a roundup of where things stood yesterday with COVID. Okay, right, let's move on. Wednesday started with 2 stories in the rags. Watch telly in driverless cars up to the speed of 37 miles an hour was in the right-wing rags because they were trying to avoid the Partygate scandal. All the rest of the rags covered a Bojo's bullshit attempt at an apology in the Commons. Now the lawyer himself, he came to the Commons, gave an apology, took a tanking for all the MPs, including some of his own, and then was off back to business as usual. He spent the evening after addressing the Commons and taking pelters, convincing his backbench MPs to vote down an inquiry into whether he broke the ministerial code or not. But we'll get a wee bit more of that when we get to when we get to Prime Minister's questions. All right. So let's move on. Wednesday here in Scotland started with a stooshy in the mountains. Landowners in the Grampian National Park are no chuffed with the Park Authority's plans for the National Park going forward. All right. The Moorland Group, who represent landowners and rural workers, say the plan will decrease farmland and infringe on game shooting estates. All right. Now the plan put forward by the Cairngorm National Park Authority is to rewild large areas of the park by planting trees and by restoring peatlands. All right. Now the shooting estate owners and the park are no chuffed with the idea because it will infringe on their livings. In other words, the toffs coming up from down south to shoot grouse and deer. Now, they're also no chuffed that the plans would see a cull of 30,000 odd deer in the National Park Range, or a cull of deer, sorry, in the National Park Range, where there is supposed to be, I'll get this right, there's supposed to be a herd of at least 30,000 red deer, and of course there's other type of deer there and all. So that was a stooshy in the mountains, because the rich landowners up there in the Cairngorm National Park don't want the park rewilded, and they don't want now the park authority says they're doing this to help Scotland reach net zero by 2045. Okay, right, moving on. Wednesday, ScotRail announces a scheme similar to the one announced in England that will give travellers half-price rail tickets in the month of May. Alright, now the tickets will apply to all destinations between 2 points. Okay, travellers will be able to book the tickets between the 9th and the 15th of May. The off-peak tickets will be half price, alright? And if you book your ticket between the 9th and the 15th of May, the ticket will be valid for a month. Now that should see an off-peak return from Glasgow to Edinburgh down to £9.99, and an off-peak return from Aberdeen to Inverness down to £23.85. So if you fancy a wee trip, the month of May will be a good time to go by train, alright? And also on Wednesday, new poll out by Ipsos Mori. The poll was done on the 19th, and it now says that 55% of Scots fancy independence over staying in the Union, alright? Now the demographic breakdown was interesting. 71% of 16 to 25 year olds want Indy, 71% of 25 to 34 year olds want Indy, 68% of 35 to 44 year olds want Indy, and 58% of 45 year olds to 54 year olds want Indy, and that's what gets us to the majority of 55%, right? The over 55s were more or less 50-50, and the over 65s are still pro-union, apparently, according to the poll. But anyway, that's where we're at with the pro-independence situation. 55% of the population are now pro-Indy, and that's before any campaign gets underway, so it's going to be a walk in the park, folks. Moving on, Wednesday. Irrelevant stuffed shirt Alex Cole-Hamilton is given airtime on the propaganda machine to bring up an SNP bad story again, alright? Mr. Irrelevant Cole-Hamilton is given time to tell us that he will be pushing for resignations in the Scottish Government if the two ferries being built at Ferguson Marine are pushed back beyond the delivery date that they have at the moment. Now, Mr. Stuffed Shirt Cole-Hamilton, the irrelevant one, I don't know why he was given that time on the television to make such stupid statements, because there's only 4 members of the Liberal Democrats as MSPs in the Parliament, and they have absolutely no power, none. And even if he was to manage to get a vote on the table for a resignation, the SNP and the Greens are majority, so it just wouldn't fly. Alright, the other thing Cole-Hamilton was given time to tell us about yesterday, the irrelevant one, was that he's a wee bit apprehensive about any coalitions within councils between the Lib Dems and the SNP, or the Lib Dems and the Tories. It appears it doesn't seem to have a problem with the Lib Dems and Labour getting into coalition in councils. Alright, so that's the irrelevant one, Cole-Hamilton. Alright, right, let's move on. Wednesday, and down that road, PMQs are on. Alright, first up was Sir Conrad Starmer, and he went on the Partygate, and he asked Bojo, the criminal Prime Minister, why everyone else down that road that stepped out of line and broke COVID rules has resigned, but why it is he thinks he doesn't have to. Well, the answer's quite simple. Bojo thinks he's above the bloody law, and that was quite clear in his answer. What he told Keir Starmer was, move along, nothing to see here, we dealt with this yesterday. Don't need to talk about it now. Ask me about the Ukraine, ask me about what's going on in the wider world, ask me about the cost of living crisis, but don't ask me about the fact that I'm a criminal PM that should be falling on my sword. So, Bojo had that smug look on his face as he was talking to Starmer, you know, that one, that entitled look that he's got, you know. All the Etonians have it. You know, that I was born to lead and the rules don't apply to me look. Anyway, next up was Blackford, and he went on the same, and Bojo, the criminal PM, basically said the very same things to Ian Blackford, the SNP. He said, just move along. It's over with. Smug smile on his face. And then he threw in the usual insult by describing the Scottish National Party as the Scottish Nationalist Party, as he would like to make them look as if they're extremists rather than mainstream. Because the people down that road don't seem to understand that the biggest political party in Scotland is the SNP. And the SNP are mainstream in Scotland. Even if they're just the third largest party in the Westminster Parliament, which seems to actually click into Bojo's daft heat. I mean, the SNP are even bigger than the Lib Dems down that road. So it should be quite clear to Bojo that the SNP are mainstream and no extremists. But of course, the English would like to have us think that we're subordinate. And that comes out when the First Minister is on Loose Women in the afternoon. Alright, so let's move on to the First Minister appearing on Loose Women. There's some arrogant English woman, blonde-haired, pretty, getting on a few bit in years. Didn't catch her name because I don't watch that sort of thing very often. I watch the clip, it's on my timeline. Anyway, she asked the First Minister if she would resign if she lost the next. Well, what she said to the First Minister originally was, if you get your next referendum, you know, and the First Minister just stopped her there before she could go any further and says, you mean when? But the arrogant English woman thinks that we need their permission. So she said, no, if we give you permission type thing. And the First Minister goes on with, when we get it. Anyway, she said to the First Minister, will you resign if you lose the next referendum? First Minister tells her, we're not going to lose the next referendum. A bit like the devolution thing, you know, we see two goes at that and voted for it twice. Well, this time we're going to vote for independence, we're on our second go at that. But the woman crosses stone anyway and says to the First Minister, will you resign if you lose? And the First Minister says, aye, I'll pass the baton on. The First Minister then went on to talk about how she and her husband would maybe like to foster going forward. But it wasn't about her and her husband, it was about whether they feel they could offer a child a safe environment to be in. And then she went on to talk about the menopause in the workplace and how she was a wee bit nervous and how the menopause is going to affect her work as First Minister. And the presenter goes on to talk with the First Minister about the First Minister using her platform to allow people to discuss the menopause in the workplace because it's not something that has been common parlance. You know, it's a bit like Sarah at the moment. Sarah's going through the menopause and it does affect her ability at works. Especially when the flushes come on. She ends up looking like a big bright red beetroot when she gets a little flush. Everybody in her work notices it. Sarah looks as if she's taking a beamer. Alright, so that was the First Minister on Loose Women. The arrogance of the buggers, but, you know, there's the First Minister of Scotland sat there and there's some English bird treating her as if she's just some wee lackey. You know, and sorry about the way I described that there, some English woman, describing her as if she's some wee lackey who needs permission from the English people to do anything. That, you know, that arrogance that makes the English people think they subsidise us. When actually it's the other way round. We actually finance them with oil, gas, and we provide their bloody their electricity for them and all, because they can't generate their own. Well, you get right, don't you? Little England has very little to offer itself or the rest of the world. Very little. I can't think of anything specific actually that England's got to offer the world other than a crooked banking system and tax avoidance out the City of London. So, let's move on. And moving on, because the time's getting on. Moving on, Wednesday, Deputy First Minister John Swinney tells the Scottish Parliament that the domestic part of the digital vaccine passport will be switched off. Now, the need to show the domestic part of the vaccine passport in Scotland finished on the 28th of February. So apparently the part that's needed for international travel will stay alive because obviously people will want to travel. Now, as you know, I didn't download the app, folks, because at the time when it was being announced, I didn't like the idea of segregating society. I don't. I was worried about civil liberties as well. But as it turns out, there was exemption certificates given out for those who couldn't get the passport. Sarah and I didn't really go anywhere where we needed a passport. It's not been until recently that we've actually been out to things, big events. We have been to a few events, a couple of Indytruck cafe events, and we've been to a few independence marches and rallies, but that was basically after most of these regulations and restrictions came to an end, as I say. But never downloaded the app. Sarah and I didn't go anywhere where we needed the app. And when we were at the height of the pandemic, Sarah and I were following what they call key worker rules anyway. So we were in and out, and that was it. Right, let's move on to the latest from Ukraine. Alright. Right. The Ukrainian commander in Mariupol says his troops are outnumbered and running out of ammunition. So it appears Mariupol is about to fall into Russian hands. Okay. Russian business tycoon and oligarch Oleg Tinkov defies Putin and lambasts Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. I guess that Mr. Tinkov has no intention of returning to Russia, or Mr. Tinkov's just a brave guy that's no fear of Putin, because Putin doesn't take criticism very lightly. In fact, as we know, he's quite deadly to people who criticise him. So, to be fair to Oleg Tinkov, brave man, sticking the boot into Putin, because Putin's likely to come along and stick plutonium in his tea. And you know how the Russians like their tea. They're a bit like the English like that. In fact, actually, the Russian and the English are very, very similar. But that's down to the fact that the Russian and English royal family were very closely intermarried for a long time. Okay, Putin also tests a nuclear weapon as a threat to the West. Okay. Putin's flexing his muscles. Sweden and Finland are talking about joining NATO, and Putin's trying to put them off. So he's flexing his muscles big style. Now, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back to the borders in the area around about Kharkiv, but the Russians are making advances in the Luhansk and the Donbass regions. All right. Now, the West had confirmed to Zelensky on Tuesday that they'll be sending heavy artillery and field machinery in the form of armoured vehicles and what they're calling defensive missile systems. As I say, Putin's parading his nukes. Putin's threatening the West with the nukes, okay? And we've already spoke about where he's likely to strike in the West. He's likely to strike this island, because that way he's no pissing about with mainland Europe, and he's no intention of launching a long-range strike on America. So if he is going to nuke anywhere, it's going to be here. So that Putin parading his nukes is something for the people of Scotland to sit up and take note of. Because as I've said, strategically this would be the right place for Putin to hit. And it would give him access to the Atlantic if it went at full-blown into a full-blown war worldwide. But more than likely, what will happen is he'd wipe 3.5 million Scots off the map, and everybody would sit back in horror and say, oops, let's get round the table and talk about this so it doesn't go any further. But it could be to the detriment of 3.5 million Scots in the Central Belt. Right. So, Putin getting his nukes out and flexing his muscles is something we have to keep an eye on. Something we really need to keep an eye on. Okie dokie, let's move on to this morning and what the papers have to say, because we're 10 minutes, as I say, I'm trying to get this down to a half-an-hour programme. So because I'm at home, I can get the papers up on the screen. So let's have a look. Scotland's papers: Prince Harry interview snub and Partygate inquiry vote are the main headlines apparently. So let's have a look. The Winnie Rag, the Daily Express, has Putin Satan 2 missile warning to the West, and happy 96th birthday to the Queen, and apparently Prince Harry's ultimate royal snub, whatever the hell that's about. The Scottish Daily Mail has, on the day the Queen releases serene birthday portrait, guess who spoils her joy once again? Palace shock at Harry, Duke of Delusion. Apparently Prince Harry's given an interview to some American TV channel and it didn't go doing well. Alright. The National has. Am I allowed to swear? Scottish snooker star slams BBC broadcast saying broadcaster saying he's English. And the main headline in the National is Liar Liar. Boris branded Pinocchio by SNP after shambolic performance at PMQs. Exclusive parliamentary or not, it's a despicable people's recognition. Prime Minister faces growing calls to quit now over Partygate. Committee chair and resignation threat. Alright, and that's apparently the chair of one of the parliamentary committee down there, the SNP chair, is going to pull out. Right, the Metro has war in Ukraine, Marines SOS, Pinocchio PM fights lies probe. He's not going to fight that lies probe, he's going to whip his MPs to vote down any probe into whether he tell lies or not. Alright, and apparently Dougie Ross is getting pelters because he didn't show up at the debate on when the PM came forward to apologise in the House. And the Scottish leader Ross under fire as he misses the debate. Alright. The Times has ScotRail lures passengers back on tracks with half-price tickets. And PM promises new vote on number 10 party to pacify MPs. Lot of pish. Tell you he's going to whip his MPs to vote against any inquiry. The Eye has Tory rebels fear being burned by Johnson. Now apparently there are people down there in the Tory ranks that want to show him, but they're feared to come forward because they think Johnson with such a big majority will just chuck him out the party, throw him under a bus and have them deselected for the next election. Alright. The Herald has Scotland faces biggest rail strike in modern history this summer. Union warns as staff to vote to walk out over plans to cut at least 2,500 jobs. Well, you know, ScotRail's been taken over by a new operator. That new operator happens to be an arm's length company created by the Scottish Government. ScotRail is now in public hands, but it doesn't change the fact that it's going to run efficiently, it's going to make money. It's going to at least wipe its face. It's going to break even. So, the Scottish Government's in for a hell of a fight with ScotRail, alright, and their employees. The Daily Telegraph has Putin tests world's deadliest weapon. Satan II nuclear missile carries a dozen warheads and can strike anywhere in the world. So as I say, Putin's flexing his muscles. And Johnson seeks to delay vote on Partygate. The Scotsman has many happy returns and a picture of the Queen. And civilians hiding terror as barbaric siege nears end, and that's the people in Europol who are bottling it because the Russians are about to move in, unfortunately. The Record has, I'll quit if I I'll quit if I'm a loose woman. Sturgeon will resign if second independence referendum ends in defeat. But as I say, we spoke about that earlier in the report, and we spoke about the polls looking like she's not going to be beaten. And the Daily Star of Scotland has, we'll probe Uranus for aliens. Now, apparently there's a probe going to be sent to the wet planet of Uranus looking for aliens. And royals at war. Wazzock, who fled 5,000 miles to US, says he's protecting Queen. Promises to make sure she has all the right people around her. And the main headline is the Eagle has landed, and they're talking about Prince Harry. Okie dokie. I have absolutely no interest in the royals whatsoever. But that's, it's always a good diversion for the mainstream media, you know. And apparently, as I say, it's the Queen of England's birthday today. Or the Duchess of Balmoral to you and me. Okie dokie. So, that's what I've got for you today, folks. Quite quick. I'm actually managing to cut this down quite well. So, we're on to the usual stuff. Now, as the council elections heat up, folks, campaign hard for whatever party it is that you believe will do the best job in running local services. There's nothing more. I mean, campaigning can be great fun, believe it or not. It can be. But when it comes to the question of Scottish independence, put your party allegiances to one side, come together as a group the way we did in 2014 and get out there and win hearts and minds. As I've said this before, Davy campaigned with radical independence, with Scottish Socialist Party, with Labour for Yes, with the Greens and with the SNP. In fact, Davy campaigned with almost every group out there who was campaigning for Scottish independence. We have to get back there, okay? So when it comes to the question of Scottish independence, partisan politics in your pockets, eyes on the prize, get out there and win hearts and minds, okay? We're already there, 55% want it. It's going to be an easy one, I think, this one. Right, where we go, I support the independent media. As you know, Stephen Kelly runs a couple of good YouTube channels, the one for with Gordon Ross and myself, and he runs the Scottish Independence YouTube channel. David and I have got the two Davies channel out there on YouTube. And there's lots of good sources of information out there, all right, including people like the wee ginger Doug Wesley, Bateman, Bella Caledonia still on the go, Newsnet Scotland still on the go, and if these guys have got a crowdfunder on the go and you've got a couple of shekels to spare, throw them in the pot, okay? And health messaging, folks. You heard me talk about COVID at the start. It's not going away. It's likely to be here with us for a long time. Remember, face coverings is guidance. So face covering in closed public spaces. Clean hands and surfaces regularly. Think about it when it comes to social distancing, alright? If I'm asymptomatic, how will it affect others? And if you've still got tests, keep testing. You guys have a great day. And we'll be back again today tomorrow, last one of the week. I'm supposed to be in a truck tomorrow. We'll see what happens. It's early yet. Have a nice day.